All right. Well, good morning, everyone here in the room. It's great to see you. So glad that you guys are all here. Welcome back. For some of you, the first time I've seen you this new year, it is great to see you. For those of you joining online, welcome. My name is Kurt. I'm one of the pastors here. So glad that you are joining us as well. Again, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to say hi. And again, just to double down on what Elder Kevin said a second ago, next Sunday, 2 years. That's a big deal. In general, these 2 years feel like a little bit of a bigger deal, if I'm going to be honest. And so we have so much to celebrate of God's faithfulness, but also to celebrate how God has been faithful through so many of you showing up, giving, serving, being a part of what is happening here in big and small ways. So whether you're just joining the story, you've been here for the entire 2 years or longer, we hope you will join us next Sunday. We're going to have a lot of fun and just celebrate what God has done and what he is doing in the future and where he's heading and how we're going to follow him as a community. And so just to, like I said, celebration is one of those disciplines that we can so easily skip over and be like, oh, I just want to get to the next thing. But it is a biblical and Jesus-oriented thing to stop and celebrate and to look back and to say, wow, God. So join us next Sunday for that. We can't wait. You ever have someone ask you how you are and like you don't really know how to answer the question? I've found myself in that space this week specifically, but mostly for the last few years. I feel like people ask me, and I want to be honest, but I'm like, you don't have that much time for my actual honest response. How many of you, just a quick show of hands, when someone asks you how you are, you say something in the realm, something to the effect of, I'm good, I'm just busy. You've said that phrase before? I'm good, I'm just busy. Yeah, most of us, right? So show of hands online, put it in the chat, right? For most of us, busy is the most common description of how we are, which is ironic because it's actually not a descriptive word of how we are. It's a descriptive word of our frenetic pace, but it's not an emotional word, right? It's not a descriptor of your being, of your soul, of your personhood. And I don't know if you know who Adam Grant is. He's an incredible researcher and author. I came across an article he wrote a couple months ago, and it was one of those articles that, like, I don't usually spam people, but this was one of those articles that I sent to almost everyone I know. Katie and I have had like 8 conversations about this specific article, and he described the feeling that many of us have had these last 20 months, and he created a word, which is always fun when you're an author. He created the word languishing. Anybody seen this article? You know what I'm talking about? This word languishing, right? Where there's so much going on in the world that we're all collectively facing, that there's this like unsettledness within us where we're stretched so far and so thin, even if we're not doing as much mentally, emotionally, we're stretched so far and so thin that things are falling off and you just kind of realize I can't catch that thing, so it just has to fall off the side of my life. And this is that sense, right? The word of the year, right, is languishing, he says. And I read that article and I thought, man, this is not only true for a lot of us specifically in this season, but for many of us, if we're honest, that is the description of much of our life, that our entire pace, our entire existence has often been at a speed that we cannot actually maintain or control. And so today, as we talk about this idea of sacred rhythms, we're going to first contrast it with what we're very familiar with, which is where we start, because you can't begin a journey of following Jesus or take a step in your journey of following Jesus if you don't know where you are, right? You have to know where you are first. And so this is so important. I was listening to a podcast this week where Carey Nieuwhof described this reality that so many of us find ourselves in of being overworked, overtired, and overcommitted, and he called it the stress spiral. I'm like, that sounds like a great roller coaster. It does not sound like a great descriptor for my life. It's way less fun when I can't get off the stress spiral roller coaster. And yet we live, like I said, such a pace in our life, and this is mostly a Western thing, maybe even more, specifically a Western American thing, where we live at a pace where there is so much happening in our life that it's actually difficult for us to engage in the activities and the presence and the kingdom of God because we have so much happening in our life, right? We speed up our mind, our body, even our relationships. And this has many negative implications for us spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And the reality is that when we do that, God and others become marginalized in our life. They kind of get moved to the edges, and we can lose the joy that we were actually created to live in. And John Mark Comer says that actually hurry is perhaps the most pervasive threat to the health of your soul, even more than any big sin or thing that we might think of when it comes to our life. Hurry is actually perhaps the most pervasive threat to our soul. And so as we step into this series of the art of intention, how do we live our life with intentionality? We started by saying we have to have clear priorities. Right? We have to know where we're running after. We have to set a direction and trajectory for our life. For many of us that are trying to follow Jesus, influenced by the way and teachings and life of Jesus. We talked last week about these different spiritual practices that we can implement into our life. How do we actually move towards spiritual formation on a regular basis? By doing things that might initially we think of as spiritual, but then we realize that there's actually not a divide when it comes to spiritual and the rest of our life from Jesus' perspective. That actually, because Jesus is over and in everything, anything that we do that actually leads us closer to love and to God is actually a great spiritual practice. So hopefully you're able to implement some of those in your life this week. But today we're talking about sacred rhythms, which is important because if you just try to have great priorities and you just try to add on spiritual practice to your life, and you never actually step into a space where sacred rhythms join the equation, you will just make yourself more busy in Jesus' name, right? Which does not actually get you closer to the person that God's created you to be. And so today, as we dive into this, I wanted to start with just this passage from the book of Romans. You've probably heard it before if you've been around church at all. It's a central passage to our church. But specifically as it comes to thinking about how are we going to live this life with God, I wanted to read this passage to you. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Romans chapter 12. If not, there's a blue Bible in the seat back pocket directly in front of you or under your seat if you're in the front row. I would encourage you to grab it and turn in this Bible to page 682. If you're joining us online, you can open another tab, or you can find it on your phone if you have a YouVersion app. But we're going to start in Romans 12, the 12th chapter, verse 1. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Rome, this little gathering of people trying to live the ways and teaching of Jesus in the middle, the very heartbeat center of the Roman Empire, the center of the world at the time, and in a culture, they found themselves in the midst of a culture that was very different than the life Jesus had invited them into. And so Paul encourages them, and he says this in Romans 12, verse 1. It says, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you." Right? This is urgent. This is like intense language. "I plead with you, give your whole bodies," right? The Greek word there is really your entire being, your whole self. Again, there's no spiritual and secular. "Give all of you to God because of all that he has done for you. Let them," meaning your whole life, "let your body and your mind and your heart and your soul be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he would find acceptable. This truly is the way to worship him," right? Songs are great, coming to church is great, but when we actually integrate and move our entire life towards the center of who God is, that's the best way we worship him. Now, I don't know about you, if you've heard this passage before, you could hear that and immediately feel a sense of should, right? Which is a four-letter word in Christianity, right? There is no should, right? But for many of us, that's how we've been raised to believe, is that we should do more. But actually, the next verse is so important because it's not an action. You actually can't just start where you are and should your way into, gotta be careful when I say that, should your way into following Jesus better. You have to actually change something internally. He says, "So don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a brand new person by changing the way that you think. Then," Paul says, "you will learn how to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." And I just wanted us to start today because the invitation that we're going to get from Jesus, that frankly I've received prepping for this message from Jesus, is a radical invitation to allow him to change the way that we think, which is often the hardest thing for Jesus to change about us. Behavior is actually much easier than belief. Right? Changing behavior, I mean, if you're a parent, you know this. You can get loud, and because I'm the bigger person in my family, I can manipulate people's behavior. But to actually change how my kids think takes a long time. I have to slow down. I have to be intentional. I often have to start at their level. And this is the invitation from God, is that we would change. We would allow him to change the way that we think so that we don't fall into and follow mindlessly the patterns, customs, and behaviors of our culture, just like those first Christians in Rome that he was writing to. And so that's the invitation for today. And again, this message, it's always, I shared with our servant leader huddle before the gathering started, it's always easy to preach out of your weakness because you have so much material, at least I do. But it's always convicting and challenging. And that was really this message. And I knew it going into this series that this was going to be the one that was going to hit home for me. And it did. And so really a lot of what we're going to talk about today is something that I'm still working through. Like, I am not up here as the expert, but I've met the expert, and her name is Ruth Barton. And so I would encourage you, we actually have a number of these at the Resource Center on the way out. If you want to get a copy of this book, it's called Sacred Rhythms, Arranging Our Lives for Spiritual Transformation. She's incredible. Again, she would tell you she's on the journey just like everybody else. But she's a lot further down the journey than I am. And so I have borrowed from her a lot for this message. We love her, and much of what she writes, Katie and I have read and tried to work it not only into our own lives first, but even into the rhythm of how we do community here at Restoration Church. But in this book, she has this list of the 10 signs that you and I are moving too fast through life. All right? I don't do a lot of lists in my messages, but this one was important. 10 signs that you are moving too fast through life. See if any of these relate to you. Irritability. It's easy to kind of get you going, right? Irritability. Hypersensitivity, right? You second guess and did they really mean that? Or, oh my gosh, she probably hates me. You know what I mean? Like, you're just hypersensitive to what's going on around you, specifically in relationships. Restlessness. Have you ever taken a day off or gone on vacation and you're like, I don't know what to do with myself. Maybe I'll listen and catch up on 5 more podcasts. Well, there's restlessness just in our bones, right? Compulsive overworking, that one is maybe more obvious. Emotional numbness. We kind of fall into this easy center set of emotions, which usually lead to only one of 2 things: sadness, anger, or anxiety, maybe. Those are kind of the emotions we're left with. But wonder and joy, or tenderness and gratitude, even excitement can get pushed out of our life when we're moving too quickly. Number 5 is escapist behaviors, right? That could be Netflix, that could be alcohol, pornography, it could be, Peloton, it could be any of these cultural narcotics. Many are worse than others, right? But these are the things that we choose to simply distract us from, what's happening in our life. And again, it's not that those things perhaps necessarily are all bad in and of themselves, but how we utilize them are not healthy for us. Some of them might be bad, but not all of them, right? Peloton is great. I should probably get one. Should work out some level. Disconnection from our identity, right? We live reactive to the tyranny of the urgent rather than knowing who we are, who God says we are, where we're heading, right? What we're called to do. There's an inability to take care of our basic human needs, right? There's been many days when I've gotten home and Katie was like, "What'd you have for lunch today?" And I was like, coffee? Is that lunch? And then you forgot to eat, right? I don't know. Some of you are like, really? You forgot to eat? Can't tell. But you have this sense where you have inability to. Some of you, it's good. An inability to take care of basic human needs, either of yourself or perhaps of another, right? You don't sleep, you don't eat healthy. You're doing things that are kind of this basic survival. And you just push those off because you decide in your mind those are less important than whatever's in front of you. That's really the underneath thing. You're moving too fast, right? Last couple, you're hoarding energy, right? You hoard energy because you have something that's on your mind, preoccupying you. You have a big meeting tomorrow, so you're just not present at the baseball game. You're there, your body's there, but your mind's not. Or you're not connecting with your spouse or your partner because you're preoccupied and you're holding your energy for something else, and you feel like you have that sense of, I have to make a decision because I'm living in scarcity around my personal energy. And then the last one she writes is slippage in spiritual practices, right? We talked to many about those things last week, but the things that actually make space for God to love us into people of love, the things that we should turn to first, are often the first to fall off, right? And revisiting this list this week, I reminded of a time when we actually were at the Transforming Center with Ruth and many others, and we were there for a weekend, and much of the time at the Transforming Center is spent in silence, like actual, like you can't talk, like you're alone, silence. It was awful. So good, but I did not enjoy it. It's very good for me, but I can't do it very often. And it was that invitation, but then meal times we could talk about it, but it was very controlled conversation. And as an extrovert and perpetual over talker, this was a great invitation for my soul because it conflicted with how I naturally think and act, right? So you see where we're going with this. But we were talking about this list and with our table group at dinner, and I remember we were asked, like, how many of those, quickly come to mind? You can think of an instance in the last few months, perhaps, that you engaged in one of those 10 activities. What was your number? And vulnerably, I was like, probably like 7, like vulnerably sharing, like, this is a big number. There are people that had been in the Transformation Center for longer. They were like 5. I'm like, shut up. Like 7, and I get that look from Katie across the table. That loving, encouragement look. And later, as we were walking back to our room before we had to be in separate rooms and be quiet again for another 12 hours, she said, Kurt, you shared you were 7, out of the list, and I just want you to know you're a 10, baby. You are a 10. And I'm like, that's the nicest thing you've ever said. Oh, you mean about the list? You mean about the list? I thought you were just missing me because it's been 24 hours. Again, you probably can list those things, and maybe there's others for you that are your kind of evidence that you're moving too fast. And so here's the thing. Again, that idea that I mentioned earlier where John Mark Comer says that the biggest threat to your soul's health is hurry, more than perhaps any particular sin. For many of us, that is true. The good news is that we're actually more distracted than we are dissonant. Right? We're more hurried than hedonistic. We're more busy than bad, but we have to ask a question: how are we going to realign? And for those of us that are trying to follow Jesus, how do we put our life in rhythm to walk in step with him more closely, more meaningfully, more wholly, so that ultimately we can have a more fulfilling experience, because that's what he actually promised us. Right? In John 10:10, he says, I've come that you might have life to the fullest. And for many of us, we go, my life is full. But that doesn't necessarily lead to life to the fullest, does it? And so this is the invitation that I think for many of us, Jesus has, I think this morning. My prayer is that we would leave with some new reflections, that actually new realities require new rhythms. Right? New realities require new rhythms. And we have all been thrust, not by choice, into a new reality through these last 2 years. Right? I mean, and trying to go backwards to what pre-2020, reality was for you is not only impossible, but will drive you crazy. And so to stop, even say, where am I? Right? Like you're at the mall, and it's like the digital thing, like you are here. Like that's what it means to not be lost, right? Jesus came to redeem what was lost. Like you have to know where you are to not be lost. And so can we ask the question, where am I? I'm in a new reality. And that new reality is going to need a new rhythm. And so here's the thing that I want to lead us into, is that you actually already have rhythms in your life, and there are things that happen in your life. You asked a question earlier with someone around you, like, what's the thing you love to do to relax? And the thing we were going to ask that we decided not to, because it's the intro to the message. I want to let you have some fun and chat with people. But really the deeper question is, when was the last time you did that thing? When was the last time you did that thing? Because for many of us, it's like, I wind down at the end of the day by having a drink or watching Netflix or catching up on the news, which just, moves my soul into this great place of love and peace and just, care for fellow humanity. And I just like, wow, we're really all in this together. When I watch the news, I totally feel like, we're on the same team, regardless of station, right? And so, we have rhythms in our life. We have things in our life that we do. For most of us, they're just too far in between. The things we know that are good for us. And then again, this goes beyond just self-care. This is actually very spiritual. There's things that we know we need, but we space them out, and then we get to the point where we're burnt out and we're frenetic and we're afraid of the ends of our life, and we don't know how to get back. And we get to the point where even a day off or a vacation doesn't solve what we're feeling inside. Now, you've ever come back from a vacation and be like, "Whoa, I need a vacation," right? And here's the thing: is that, and this is stolen from that podcast I mentioned before from Carey Nieuwhof, which is incredible. He said, "Time off won't heal you if how you spend your time on is broken." I mean, some of you, that's all you got what you needed to come for, right, to church today. Like, time off will not heal you if how you spend your time on is broken. And so our hope is that today we want to look at how do we actually build our time, our life, our rhythm in a way that reverberates with that sense of like middle C, where you're like you're connected to this resonance of who you're meant to be. I remember I was sitting by the ocean. We were in Hawaii a couple years ago, and for me, like, the ocean is always a place that I go to just like recenter, because I'm a control freak, and the ocean, I can't control it, and it doesn't need me. And whether I'm there to notice it or not, the tide comes in and the tide comes out. And I remember sitting on the shore and just recognizing that. And many big moments of our life have happened near the beach. The call that God gave to us to be here, come back home to San Diego, happened on a bench in Carlsbad that has become a sacred place for us. But I was sitting there, and it was, again, it was like that sense that my soul came into resonance with like the metaphysical life, where God was like, you understanding that the ocean doesn't consult you, doesn't ask your opinion, and that you can't adjust it whatsoever. You recognizing that and coming into surrender, like we just sang about in that song, to that reality is actually the beginning of a sacred rhythm. And so for most of us, right, we have things that happen in our life, but maybe we've never thought about it as rhythm. There's rhythms of work and play. There's spaces in our life where we know that we have to pause and know we have to rest, and there's times we know we have to push. We have to overcome something and climb a hill, right? And the reality is that if we don't incorporate healthy and sacred rhythms, I would argue God-ordained rhythms, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I think this is helpful for you. Even if you don't believe everything we believe, or trust the whole Bible is true, that's okay. You could try this. I think it'll benefit your life. But if we don't work those rhythms of pause and play, work and rest into our life, we will be exhausted for the rest of our life. And so our desire, the desire that you have, I believe you wouldn't be here otherwise, that you have right now to have that longing for love and connection with God, really is most exemplified and is most developed in this space of sacred rhythm, right? It's in this space of sacred rhythm, because rhythm is really another word for trust. Trust that limits are not a gimmick, they're actually a gift, right? Rhythm is when I agree with God that my limits were a gift, not a trick, not a gimmick, not something that I have to overcome. And I'm all about like self-actualization and being the best you can be, but sometimes being the best you can be recognizes what you can't do or where you shouldn't go. And in fact, Jesus' original followers asked him, what does it mean to actually follow you? And in Matthew 11, he says it this way. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." A real rest. Again, this is more than just come take a nap with me, right? This is, although Jesus did do that, right? But this is a real soul level rest. Then he says something that feels weird to us, but totally fit in their first century context. It says, "Take my yoke upon you." Right? It's this idea of like, you're carrying something. All of us have this yoke that like is around our neck, on our shoulders, and you're carrying something. And for many of us, our yoke, if we're honest, it's heavy, it's ill-fitting, it's rough. And he says, take mine. Follow me. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart. I mean, imagine a rabbi even saying that, much less the Son of God. "Take my yoke upon you, and I will give you rest. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear," which again, the Greek translation of that more accurately says it's well-fitting. Right? It's well-fitting. "And the burden that I will give you," because there still is a burden, but it's light. It's carryable. And so the question for us today is, what does that look like now, 2,000 years later? Like in your life specifically, How do you transliterate what Jesus says into your life and how you and I live? And again, I think it's one of those invitations that asks the question, does God work in us only when we're working? Or perhaps could God actually do some of his best work when you and I stop trying so hard, when we try to stop controlling everything, when we actually stop working and bring a posture and an attitude of surrender and say, I'm going to organize my life, not just surrender in a moment, but I'm going to intentionally, proactively, forward thinking, I'm going to surrender to this limit that I'm experiencing, this stress, this overwhelm that I've kind of put up with for the last few years. And I'm going to surrender to maybe there's a better way. I'm going to let God change my mind. I think it's interesting that when the Apostle Paul, the same person that wrote the Romans passage that we looked at just a moment ago, when he was trying to describe love to a culture that was very much aware of what they thought love was, but was missing it, when he writes in 1 Corinthians 13, not just for weddings, right, that he describes love, this life of love that we're invited into, that the first attribute he describes is patient. Again, better translated is unhurried. Because you can't love in a hurry, can you? I mean, like if you're in a relationship, like if you just slow down, your relationship will get better, guaranteed. Like if you do nothing else. Because for most people, psychologists would back this up, that for most people, when they understand or felt, right, when they get a sense that you have listened to me, the recipient feels that internally the same way that they do when they are getting an expression of love. So there's this sense of unhurriedness that Paul describes when he describes love, both for us in our relationships with others, but also when you think that God is described as love, God is actually unhurried. There's a Japanese theologian and philosopher that says God travels at 3 miles per hour, which is a casual stroll. I walk at about 6 because I'm always in a hurry. It says God walks at about 3 miles per hour. And so it's going to take a deep commitment to engage in some of these sacred rhythms. These rhythms that help us find a pace that actually builds our soul in such a way that even when life interrupts us, because it will, we have enough stored up in our soul's kind of, spiritual bank that when more is demanded from us in one moment or in a season, we have something to offer. We're not running, a deficit already. And that we know when the next deposit will be because we live in a space of spiritual rhythm. The monastics call this a rule of life. We've taught through this in our Emotionally Healthy Spirituality series, but to kind of bring it to this rhythm idea for us today, right? The purpose of our rhythms is to find in our schedule a pace that not only we can sustain, that's just kind of healthy spiritual stuff aside, but more specifically for those of us trying to love and follow Jesus, that we would be more connected to the pace of Christ in our life, and so we would actually be closer to him. I don't know if you've ever felt in your life like, if Jesus could just kind of keep up with me, like that would be great. Like, come on, like God be my co-pilot situation. You ever seen that bumper sticker? God is not interested in being my co-pilot. He actually wants me to stop and get out the car and walk with him. And the same, I think, is true for you. John Ortberg, who is an incredible author and pastor, wrote in the foreword to the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he writes this: to choose to live an unhurried life in our day is somewhat like taking a vow of poverty in earlier centuries. And because what he's saying is that this is a costly, sacrificial choice. There are things that we will feel like we will have to say no to and miss out on to actually choose to pursue health in a sacred rhythm. And again, that title of John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, I mean, it is a ruthless endeavor, isn't it? To live in a sacred rhythm will take some aggression because everything in our culture, like we talked about last week, is drawing us in a certain way. And again, that's not the world versus church. Churches can be overprogrammed. In the Barton research study, pastors perhaps are one of the top 4 stressed out occupations, especially in the last 2 years. I don't say that to get sympathy. I say that to say, like, this is not something that, oh, just because you've walked with Jesus for a long time, you've got this on lock. Like I said, this is a thing that has been challenging to me even this week. That through studying for this and preparing this, I found myself multiple times hitting a block because I'm like, man, I'm just not, like, I don't have stuff to give good advice on because this is something that I am out of rhythm right now. I am not actually in what I know is good for me, what I know is the rhythm that makes my soul feel connected and alive. I'm not in it presently. And so for all of us, right, I'm on the journey with you. We must attempt to work towards, pray towards, schedule and plan towards our purpose and our plans on the path that is demonstrated by the life of Jesus. We must align our plans, our rhythms, our schedules on the path that is demonstrated in the life of Jesus. And when we do that, we will actually experience that spiritual formation that I believe God wants to do in your life. He wants to grow and form you, right? We will let him change our life, change our mind. And when we do that, others will experience transformation around us because of the formation that God is doing in us, right? The reason we have sacred rhythms is that we pursue spiritual formation so that others may experience transformation. Because when I'm at the end of my rope, my wife does not experience transformation in my life, at least from me. My kids do not experience the goodness of God from their dad when I'm too stressed out and too stretched thin. That our church doesn't experience the best when I'm too stressed out and too stretched thin, when I'm out of rhythm. My finances are not at their best. My enjoyment and excitement for life is not there. Our friendships suffer. Everything in our life deteriorates when we are out of rhythm. And so what do we actually do about that? Like, what do we practically do about that? Well, I want you to think about kind of 3 blocks of rhythms that you may have in your life, or that you ought to pay attention to, that you may not have put in that language, but that you have in your life. Daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, and then like monthly, annual, or like life stage rhythms, like something a little bit longer, right? So depending on your personality, thinking life stage might be too much for you, and that's okay. For some of you, that makes a lot of sense. But all of us have daily, weekly, and then longer term. And so the question for our daily rhythms, right, is what do I need to do every day? There are things that you do every day that build a rhythm for your life. You may brush your teeth. You may, play with your kids. You may go to work most days, right? Like whatever it might be, there are things that you do, and you know that there are spaces or adjustments that you can make to your rhythms on any given day that will actually help that day go better, right? Perhaps another question is, what do you need to do to start the day? And perhaps for some of us, we can kind of compartmentalize work days and non-work days, and maybe those are different. But still, there are probably things that you and I need, if we pay attention to our life, that we ask, hey, what are the things I need to do to start the day if I want to be in good rhythm? There are many days when if I hit snooze and kind of go past when I'm supposed to get up, my family feels it. And I go into like, oh, I just need to over-caffeinate and zombie to the kitchen, make some coffee. It's like, why do we have a Chemex? It tastes better, but I need it now, kind of situation, right? And then there are other days when actually I will find myself getting up earlier and feeling more alive, more rested, more focused. I'm a better dad, I'm a better partner, I'm a better husband, I'm a better person, I'm a better Jesus follower, even though I didn't get more sleep, right? And it can feel counterintuitive, but there are things that we may need to do that feel like they're a takeaway that actually build into our life. So what are the things you need to do to start your day? And then how can you schedule and guard the things that will help you be at your best? It's one thing to put it on the calendar or to say, I need to do this. It's a very different thing to actually guard that. Right? To actually say, this is really, really important for me, and to communicate those needs ahead of time so you're not just reacting to someone when they interrupt, right, your time. And I know for many of us, when we have 3 kids, under 7 in our house, I'm like, this is not altogether that simple, right? But if we at least are aware of it, we can begin to work around it and go, okay, my kids are on a pretty significant, they're pretty, significantly plannable rhythm. It's frustrating when it's not the rhythm I would like, but Leighton gets up at 6 every day. Selah, 7:30, maybe. Just we know the difference. And so if I want uninterrupted time, most likely that means there's going to be a 5 on my alarm clock. And I can go into victim mode and be like, oh my gosh, kids are so ridiculous and they just demand so much. Why? I need more of God. It's like, then the Holy Spirit speaks to me. He's like, yeah, you do. That's true. But if you weren't up watching Jimmy Fallon, maybe you would not be so tired at 5. There's this thing called YouTube. You can watch it the next day. Sidebar. All right. So what are the things, that was my attempt to make something that might feel guilty funny. It didn't really work so well, but that's okay. Try it again next time I do this. All right. So what are the things you need to schedule and guard for, you to be at your best, right? And then not make excuses like I often do, like to really go, I'm actually the boss of much of my schedule, right? And you are as well. Weekly rhythms. What do you need to do on a weekly basis? Right? Are there things that if you kind of had a 7-day check-in, it would really benefit your life? They don't have to just be spiritual, although it is so fascinating that from the beginning of the scriptures and all throughout human history, almost, with very few exceptions, almost every civilization has found themselves on a 7-day rhythm. I mean, why is that? Again, whether you believe it scientifically or not, this idea that God worked for 6 days and then rested on the 7th is this beautiful narrative of God setting into motion a sacred rhythm for your life. Do you have a day? Doesn't have to be Sunday. Do you have a day that you say, this is Sabbath, this is set apart, this is a day that I rest, replenish, relax, rejuvenate, and enjoy my life? Doesn't mean you just sit around on a log and be like, contemplating the universe. Like you may do activities, but they're activities of your choice. They're things that bring out life in you and those around you. It's play, it's wonder, it's fun. Do you have a day that you commit to a Sabbath, right? Are there other things that you need to do in your life, right? Are there certain days within a week that are best for certain activities? And can you kind of corral those things to make sure that you can do those things in rhythm, right? Perhaps for you, like Monday's just not the day to get in a group because every week at your job, Monday's just intense and it's one more fire you got to put out. But by Thursday, you're kind of like, hey, we're good. We're turning down the dial. So Thursday's the night I'm going to add something to my life. Again, can we be honest that we are actually in control of our schedule more than we often feel like we are or want to admit that we are, and say, what are the things that I need to do on certain days within the week? And can I commit to that? And then again, monthly or annually, or again, maybe even life stage, are there things that fall into a sacred rhythm for you, right? One of the things that we try to do in our family, Kate and I try to have a monthly check-in with each other, where we kind of just reflect on what we're thinking and how we're doing, and we ask the really terrifying questions of, hey, this is how I'm seeing myself grow or progress or get better. What do you see? And then we shut up and listen to each other. And it's like, oh, maybe I'm not as awesome as I thought I was, right? And that's super helpful for us. We have an annual kind of review of the year, prayer and planning thing that we do every single year. And then this year, I got COVID, and so we had to rebook it. And so it was one of those things where, like, if I'm just honest, and it's totally, like, not a big deal, like, it's actually this weekend, we're really looking forward to it, but it's one of those things that because that was a rhythm that we have done for multiple years, when we didn't have it coming into this new year, these first 3 weeks of January, I just felt like I'm, like, kind of fumbling forward. And at first I was so frustrated. And then I looked back and I go, wow, like, we really have established a rhythm that is really life-giving for us when it comes to that. And I miss it when it's not there. And what at first felt like perhaps a sacrifice or something to block out on our calendar took work. It was a joy, but it was a discipline. Now feels automatic so much that when we don't have it, we miss it. Right? So maybe there's something in your life that's an annual thing or a monthly thing where you like I said, check in with your partner or a mentor or a life group leader and say, here's what's going on in my life. Here's how I'm doing. Like, what are you seeing in me? Or what do you see areas of growth that I could pursue this next season or this next year? Do you take an annual vacation, which is the difference than a family trip for those of you that have kids? Just to clarify, family trips are great. You also need to take a vacation. There is so much research biblically, spiritually, and also beyond that, it says an annual vacation extends your life, makes your relationships better, helps you see who you are better. Take a vacation. We joke with our staff, like, we not only have unlimited vacation here, you actually have a vacation minimum. You have to take 10 days off if you work at Restoration Church. Some of you are like, can I have a job? Right? So, right? But we believe in this, right? So do you take a vacation where you actually unplug? Not a pseudo work trip. Right? And again, let's just be honest as we close this idea out, right? The last 2 years with work from home and all that stuff, while there's many benefits and conveniences that have come from that, it has like smashed all together the things that often in our life were separated by space, which was really good for our soul. Hey, I left the office, and so now I have to like make a different choice. I may still engage with some things that are connected to the office because my phone is on me, but I'm in a different place. Whereas now, is it the guest bedroom? Is it the playroom? Is it the office? Yes. Like kind of all of the above. And I think that's a really important thing for us to understand. And so even if you work from home, right, when you log off at 5 or 5:30, whatever it is, can you take a 10-minute walk around your neighborhood to go, hey, I'm leaving work, and now I'm coming home, and I'm in a different space mentally, right? Because I get it. I get that it's complicated, some things, when all of our life is now in the same kind of bucket, and it gets all mixed together. But can you implement a rhythm that helps create some distance in our life between different activities so that we can find ourselves more wholly showing up to both of those things? That you are actually fully present in whatever season or space that you're in. Again, whether that's weekly, daily, if it's monthly, annually, or in your life stage. This season of your life, you're going to have different priorities because you're closing down your business season versus those that are starting up a new venture. Right? In this season of your life, as a student, you're going to have different rhythms than you will, next year when you go off to college. Right? You're going to have different seasons or different rhythms and sacred rhythms in your life in the season of being a new parent than when you're a parent of an elementary school child. Right? And that's okay. That you're not expected to be the same person you were 2 years ago, and you're not even expected by anybody else, especially by God, to be the perfect version of yourself yet. So again, this is an invitation. This is an invitation to arranging our lives for spiritual transformation, as Ruth Barton says in this book, to find a sacred rhythm that is not only connected to the life and the model and the teachings of Jesus, but is actually going to create the best and most whole version of you. When you live this art of intention kind of life in rhythm with God and ultimately in rhythm with your own schedule that you are actually more in control of than perhaps you would admit. And so my homework for you this week, we love giving homework around here, right, is that you would actually just take an audit of your schedule. You would ask the question, where am I? What are the things that I just thought were gotta-dos, but actually there's a rhythm to my life if I pause to kind of map it out? What are the things I do every day? What are the days that are best for those things? What are the things I do every week? What are the things that when I add something new to my life, I take something else away because I'm a human that has limits and I don't have infinite time or energy, and that's actually a gift. How do I get around other people so that I'm not just running after the things that I think are important with no other input in my life to say, whoa, it seems like you're burning the candle at both ends. How can we help? How can we encourage you? I mean, ultimately, that's what life groups are for, right? It's so that we can find a space where, as a community, we run together for a season, and that someone might ask you, hey, how's it been this week? How's it been in your family? How has your sacred rhythm or lack of intentional rhythm shown up in your life? That formation that happens in you to actually create transformation in others. How is that going? So that's my request, right? That's my challenge. And again, I'm on this journey with you. If you want to get a copy of this book, again, it's out by the Welcome Center. We'd love for you to pick it up, and if we sell out, we can order some more. But it's so challenging and so helpful. But when you and I, when we create this sacred rhythm in our life, there is something that God does because we meet him at his pace. And when we live an unhurried life, our souls can actually flourish more than perhaps when we're running after all these things that are going on that we might think are important, but actually can take life away from us. So I'd love to pray for you before we continue to worship together. Let's pray together. God, we want to open our hands and our hearts and our minds and say, would you change the way we think? I know for many, this idea might feel scary. They might jump their first thought to be what are they going to have to lose or get rid of, and that's real. And I just pray, Holy Spirit, by your power, would they have this wave of courage to say, what do I really want in my life, in my week? How can I live this art of intention kind of life with sacred rhythms in place so that I can run for the long haul? Whether that's in my job, with my finances, with you, God, with my relationships, that I can not only show up as my best version, but I can stay for the long haul because I'm in a sustainable rhythm. Jesus, thank you that there's so much you could have said about this, and yet what you consistently did for your first followers, and we're so grateful it's recorded for us now, thousands of years later and thousands of miles away, is that you just did it. You just modeled it. You got up early to pray. You went to the synagogue on the Sabbath. You spent time in community. You ate and drank and laughed with friends. You didn't let the demands of the urgent and immediate cloud out your purpose. And so we pray that you would help us do those same things. That we would recognize where we are, recognize those signs of an overly hurried life, and we would invite you to change the way that we think, to ruthlessly and fearlessly step into a sacred rhythm with you. So it's in your name we pray all these things. Amen.